Kamala Harris made her pick for VP, and that is Tim Walz, the governor of Minnesota. Now, it was basically down to Tim Walz and Josh Shapiro, the governor of Pennsylvania. And Shapiro had drawn some criticism from the progressive element of the Democratic Party because he's like an unabashed supporter of Israel, written bigoted things about Palestinians, even tried to volunteer for the Israeli army as a younger man.
And he also compared protesters to KKK members. He literally compared people who were protesting for a ceasefire to the KKK.
Well,
I find it hard to keep track of the difference myself. Thank God they wear the white hood so we can tell the difference.
So when the pick was made, progressives breathed a sigh of relief because, Tim Walz also has a record of things like supporting school lunches for children in his state, among other progressive policies. But other people in the Democratic Party were not pleased. And all of a sudden, this like talking point came out, and it came from both Democrats and Republicans, that somehow anti-Semitism was afoot. And the reason why Josh Shapiro wasn't picked was because of anti-Semitism. And amazingly, among the people to make this argument was a supposed progressive named Van Jones on CNN.
So here's the challenge you've got in this party. And people don't want to talk about it. We got to talk about it. On the one hand, you have a lot of young people who are concerned about Gaza. You have a lot of Muslims and Arabs and others. They have not felt seen by the Biden administration.
By the way, speaking of not feeling seen, I mean, it would be nice for Van Jones to mention that a lot of Jews are also speaking out about this issue. Jewish Voice for Peace, if not now. There have been Jewish protesters at a lot of the encampments. So this is kind of goes hand in hand with a lot of what we've been seeing so far, which is that supporting Palestinian rights is anti-Semitic and that Jews are unsafe. But this is the typical erasure of the Jews who are protesting for Palestinian rights. So not surprising, I guess, to hear that from Van Jones.
I mean, Van Jones, if you're watching this, if you happen to be a subscriber to Useful Idiots, unlikely, but if you are, there are two Jews right here who are feeling unseen by you. Okay.
Yes. Two. In fact, Aaron and I are working on an album called Two Unseen Jews. And it's dedicated to Van Jones. So there you go.
Classic. Gonna be a classic.
It's gonna be so good.
I started hearing that genocide joke. That was building. And so those folks needed to have a candidate that they could feel comfortable with. This helps them in that regard. But you also have anti-Semitism that has gotten marbled into this party. You can be for the Palestinians without being an anti-Jewish bigot, but there are some anti-Jewish bigots out there. And there's some disquiet now, and there has to be. How much of what just happened is caving into some of these darker parts in the party? So that's going to have to get worked out.
So much to unpack there. But first of all, I'd like to point out the fact that the anti-Semitism that's so marbled into the Democratic Party, I mean, literally the head Democrat in the Senate is Jewish. The lady running for president is married to a Jewish man. But Van Jones has kind of gone off the rails when it comes to the issue of anti-Semitism and conflating it with support for Palestine. Van Jones used to be a radical, and he, on another occasion, compared wearing a keffiyeh to a Confederate flag. Okay? So I don't know if this is ideological, if he actually believes this, if he thinks this is a good financial move or PR move, or he's trying to fashion himself as a radical who will conflate criticism of Israel with anti-Semitism, which is really dangerous. But also, it's worth mentioning that Van Jones, who's positioning himself as a great ally of Jews and a foe of anti-Semitism, remember he spoke at that rally in Washington, D.C., which featured John Hagee, who said that God had sent Adolf Hitler as a hunter.
Yeah, he did. He did. And the crowd booed him when he said that there should be a ceasefire, basically.
Right.
So yeah, that's what happens for Van Jones when he tries to like suck up to like the worst people in the world. But obviously he hasn't learned his lesson because he's still doing it. He's such an opportunist. He's doing the classic thing. He's doing the classic thing where like you speak from the left, but you like reinforce the talking points of the right to undermine the left. Right. But you position yourself as being the one voice on the left who's willing to call out rather leftist. It's very
Right.
widespread, and it's just opportunism because that gets you a seat at the table in corporate
Exactly.
media because they love people who will throw leftists under the bus. I mean, this whole talking point that it's somehow anti-Semitic to not pick a Jewish running mate. I mean,
No,
like
it's so
you know,
ridiculous.
so when Joe Biden didn't pick, I don't know, Bernie Sanders to be his VP, was that
Right.
anti-Semitic?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's just it's so
Yeah.
stupid.
True.
It's so dumb. And like when Trump didn't pick Tim Scott
Was
of
that
South
racist?
Carolina, is he racist now?
Right.
I mean, it's insane. But yet everyone's doing this because everyone loves to throw the actual left, and especially people who are critical of Israel, under the bus. And I got to
Right.
say, Van Joe is not alone in this. It reminds me of people who are like, who I've experienced, I have a lot of experience with, who are like, I'm totally critical of U.S. imperialism, of U.S. hegemony, but there are people who are paid by Assad and Russia, and
Right.
you know what I mean? It's the same thing. It's just
Right.
it's so insidious. It's opportunism, and Van Jones really is taking the cake doing this because it's so gross what he's doing.
Yeah, it really is. And then people get to say, look, it's even Van Jones, even leftists like Van Jones, even people who support Palestinian rights like Van Jones are calling out the anti-Semitism. That's how bad the anti-Semitism is. But you know what, Aaron, we got to give credit where credit's due. And the OG isn't this anti-Semitic person that the OG isn't an anti-Semitic that Shapiro isn't getting nominated. It is, of course, Jake Tapper. Remember when he's like, there's something about him. I wonder what.
I don't know anybody more critical of Netanyahu as a governor than Shapiro, but for some reason, people keep attacking him.
As we analyze on Monday morning.
Yes, Jake Tapper's brainchild really has taken off, and he must be very proud of himself because that talking point really has spread around.
It really has. Yeah. And from people who also hate Bernie Sanders. All these people saying, of course, they're not going to pick a Jew. Progressives won't pick a Jew. Progressives don't like a Jew. Literally, progressives signed up for Bernie Sanders and have signed up this time, many of them, for Jill Stein.
It's true. Like when Bernie Sanders didn't win the nomination in 2 consecutive races, did any of these people say that was anti-Semitic?
Yeah, right.
Well, of course not, because they were doing everything they could to destroy Bernie's candidacy. It's just so gross. It's just so
obvious. Yeah.
And someone else who loves this talking point is, unsurprisingly, CNN's Dana Bash.
Because I feel like it bears repeating that the attacks on Josh Shapiro for his stance on Israel and protests, he has the same stance as the non-Jewish contenders, and they're picking at him, and we should not let that go unsaid. But it is, again, noteworthy who.
So that's Dana Bash again, following the Jake Tapper, Van Jones playbook, that somehow Josh Shapiro is being singled out because of his religion.
Aaron, do you remember when Walz compared peaceful protesters to the KKK? Do you remember when Walz volunteered to serve in the IDF?
I do not remember that. Or when he said that Palestinians are too battle-minded to make peace. That's literally something that Shapiro said about Palestinians, that they're too battle-minded to make peace.
So disgusting.
But again, you can't talk about that on CNN. None of that context in which there's an occupation of Palestinians, there's now a mass murder campaign, and some people happen to be outraged about that. That sort of moral stance is not allowed to exist. So therefore, it has to be about anti-Semitism.
Well, Aaron, I think that you and I, to be fair, we lack the anti-Semitism sensitivity that Dana Bash has. Dana has a really good anti-Semitism DAR because she was courageous and insightful and astute enough to realize that what we were seeing on college campuses is very reminiscent of Europe of the 1930s.
That's right. She did. She's obviously very attuned to anti-Semitism, given that she's willing to invoke the Nazi Holocaust to smear anti-war protesters.
Yeah. It's so similar. Again, I can't tell. Is it people calling for a ceasefire, or is it people in white hoods and white robes who, burn crosses on people's lawns, or is it Nazis? It's a fine line. Who's to say really where one starts and the other one ends?